What's up, everyone? Now that February is coming to a close, I want to do my wrap-up and March TBR video. This month, despite it being a pretty short one and it starting off a little rocky for me, I managed to read 6 books, which I'm pretty proud about myself, and I had 0 DNFs, which, again, pretty proud because I definitely thought, maybe I'd have 1 in here, but everything I read, I just genuinely really enjoyed, and I'm just, so far, 2025 has been a really good year for books. So, starting off, I started this month incredibly strong, and I probably set the bar too high for myself for a first book of the month, because, and you'll see why, this is already an early contender for book of the year for me. It was just absolutely incredible. It was a chunker of a book. It was long. It was 1,200 pushing 1,300 pages, but I just loved every second of it. So the start of this month, I start with The Stand by Stephen King, his post-apocalyptic epic American novel. And this book, if you guys have seen my review, you know what I think of this. This is seriously just one of the best stories I've ever read. I know that The Stand is controversial among King fans and among fans of the people who've read it, but for me, I just absolutely adored this all the way through. From the moment it opened to the moment it closed, I was thrilled by it. I couldn't get enough of it. This is just one of those stories where I was totally enraptured by everything he was doing, from the characters to the plot to the pacing to the villain to the atmosphere to just everything about it, to the the themes of good and evil, and does God exist, and all those kinds of things. And I just genuinely adored this. And I know a lot of people they think it's too long, or they think the ending's controversial, but for me, this was just one of those books where it just, there were flaws, but those flaws were so minute compared to how great it was. It is just one of those books I think I'll think about for the rest of my life, and I'll probably reread for the rest of my life. I just genuinely enjoyed it so much, and so far it's my favorite Stephen King novel I've read. Although I think The Dark Tower has the potential to beat it, because we'll talk about that later, but I've been very impressed by it so far. But I gave The Stand a 9.5 out of 10. Just incredible. I mean, I've been trying very hard this year to, give scores that I think are deserved. I sometimes, people will say, maybe I'm too nice with my opinions on books, but this is just one of those things where I just genuinely loved it so much. It was just so good. And there was just, I don't blame anyone for not liking this book, but for me, just excellent. I would almost consider it a masterpiece, and maybe a reread would push it into that masterpiece category for me. But yeah, just a great book, like a great novel. And I can't believe how long it is, because it didn't feel that long. The second book I read, and this is a dip in quality compared to The Stand and its previous entries, is The Veiled Throne by Ken Liu, the third book in the Dandelion Dynasty. Didn't love this one as much. I think coming off The Wall of Storms, which was this really epic, just mind-blowing fantasy novel, and then reading this, which is a much more slow burn political book where it's discussing more philosophy, it's discussing more culture, identity issues, it's discussing just politics in general, compared to The Wall of Storms, which is kind of this epic scope narrative, especially the second half where the war begins, just incredible. And then kind of going in this where it's less focused on war and getting revenge, and more focused on how do we cope with the fact that we've been invaded and this entirely other culture has been introduced to us. Like, how do we deal with that? It was kind of a miss for me. And it's one of those things, I understand why intellectually Ken Liu decided to go in this direction, and I could appreciate those aspects of the book. I like the philosophy, I like the engineering, I like the politics, but I just think this year I've been kind of looking for books where I can just kind of turn my brain off, for lack of a better term. Last year I read Malazan, and they were really dense, really philosophical books, and I think that this just wasn't what I was looking for when I read it. It's still a good book, still great character moments. I still think the plot is really intriguing. I think what Ken Liu does with these themes and politics and all that is very well executed. It's very well written. But for me, I wasn't as interested in this story as much as I had been for the previous two Dandelion books. And I felt like the pacing really suffered in this book. And although I actually liked this aspect, I thought the cooking competition just really, again, kind of really slowed down this book when I felt like it should have been starting to speed it up. And it was a good book, but it wasn't a great book like the previous Dandelion Dynasty books. So I gave this an 8 out of 10. I would probably say that this is my least favorite book of the year. So I read my favorite and then my least favorite back to back. So, I think it's hard to follow up The Stand with The Veiled Throne. I think that plays a part of it. I think it plays a part that I was hoping for more with The Wall of Storms, and that's not what The Veiled Throne is or even attempts to achieve. But, I have to be honest when I'm disappointed, and I was. After that, I read The Gunslinger, which is the first book in the Dark Tower series by Stephen King. Again, this was not necessarily what I had planned mentally. I was hoping to finish Dandelion Dynasty immediately this month, but after reading The Veiled Throne and just kind of feeling burnt out on that story at the moment, I needed to switch it up. And The Dark Tower has just been this series in the back of my mind that has just been teasing me and teasing me and teasing me. And I've been wanting to read it, and I've been wanting to read it, and I've been wanting to read it over the last several years, especially last year. And I made it one of those priority series this year. I have to read it, and I have to finish it. So I was just like, you know what? I'm going to treat myself. I'm going to do something I don't traditionally do. And I'm just going to read the book that I really want to. I'm just going to read the story that I feel like is going to engage me more than trying to push through another book that maybe wasn't going to be as engaging. And I'm glad that I did that, because The Gunslinger was wild. It is a flawed book. There is no doubt about that. The way it's framed, and it has some structural problems, and it's kind of written in a short story format that doesn't entirely work. But The Gunslinger is just one of those books where it's just so enjoyable. The vibe is incredible. I think it's incredibly atmospheric. I think King just manages to write fantasy in a way that is really provocative and really fresh compared to what I'm used to, which is very, medieval, dragons, all that. And this is just totally different from that. This is a multi-world story. There's, guns in this one. The pacing's excellent. It's a trip. It's a very weird. It's obviously, no surprise. It's very drug induced. You can like practically smell the drugs on this one. Like there's just something about it that's so volatile and so raw and so fresh that I really, really enjoyed this. This was just a delight to read. The flaws are glaring, and I don't blame anyone for reading this book and being like, I didn't really like it. But for me, I did. It's not by any means or any stretch of the imagination best fantasy book I ever read, but it's a very good story, and I really enjoyed it. And I gave it an 8.3 out of 10, and it was a good time. So after that, I decided if I'm going to start The Dark Tower, I like to try and read two stories at the same time that have very different vibes. This is just something about me where I like to read two series usually at the same time. And I'm kind of I'm in the middle of Dandelion Dynasty, but I'm at the end, so I can't really choose that. And then I'm also kind of in the middle of Dungeon Crawler Carl, but it's not necessarily a priority series for me. It's just one of those books, one of those series where I throw it in there when I want something to like laugh at. So this was more like a more serious series that I want to get into. So I read The Heart of What Was Lost, which is an Austin art tale by Tad Williams. I've been wanting to get back into Austin art for a while now. I loved Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn. Some of my favorite fantasy books I've read in recent memory. I think it's a better trilogy than Lord of the Rings. That's my hot take. So I was really excited to get in this one. I wasn't sure how this novel was going to make me feel, because I tend to not love bridge stories in general. Usually, if it's not absolutely essential reading, I tend to not read it, but I trust Tad Williams to deliver a good story. And he did. I thought that this was a much needed story to be told, especially now that I'm reading The Witchwood Crown and how it all ties in. It really just really gets you in the mind of the Hikadea, which are the main antagonists in Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn. You really get to see a new, fresh perspective from them. And I really enjoyed that switch. I thought that it was so essential because, I like when an author is willing to use their bad guys and use their perspectives and say, maybe it's not entirely wrong for them to want revenge. And that's something that Tad Williams does incredibly well in this book. I thought the plot was good overall. I didn't love the characters in this one. I just felt like there wasn't enough time to develop them. I enjoy them, but I didn't love them. But I love the additional world building. I love the heart of what was lost, which is kind of a central point in this book. I love the general, very just dark vibe that we get from this book. And it's just good overall. I also gave this an 8.3 out of 10. Just a really good story in the Austin art universe. Not my favorite, probably my least favorite, but it's still very good. After that, I jumped into The Drawing of the Three, which is the second book in the Dark Tower by Stephen King. This was incredible, guys. This was just so good. so good. If you want me to talk about it for 13 minutes, go watch my spoiler-free review on it. But this was just one of those books where blown away by how good it was. Everyone said, "Oh, just wait until The Drawing of the Three. If you really like The Gunslinger, you're gonna love The Drawing of the Three." And I knew the quality was gonna jump. I knew it. Stephen King has this ability to just write, and as he's aged as a writer, he's become better and better, or that's what seems to me. And everyone says, "Oh, The Drawing of the Three, that's when The Dark Tower really comes into its own." And they were totally right. Just everything about this book, everything about what makes The Gunslinger great or good, The Drawing of Three does better. It does the weird vibe better. It does atmosphere better. It does characters better. It does the action better. I thought it was better paced somehow. I just thought it was incredible. I thought that the way that this opens up, the prologue and what happens rolling, and then the first section, and what just this entire story with what happened and what I thought was going to happen, just so incredible. I think. I'm obviously a fan of Stephen King, a big fan at that. So I'm already kind of geared to enjoy his stories, but man, I can't believe it's taken me this long to get around to this series. Maybe I need to work through some other stuff first, but I kind of wish I read this earlier. I kind of do, because I can already tell, 2 books in, this is going to be one of those series where it's going to be top 5. You know what I mean? I just feel that, in my bones. I can just feel that this is going to be very special to me because of how much I'm enjoying it so far. It's just The Drawing of the Three. It could be a contender for Book of the Year. It really could. I don't think it's as good as The Stand, but there's just something about it where I keep thinking about it, and I keep thinking about how great it was. And I keep coming back to it, and I just feel like it's, again, one of those stories in the future where I finish the Dark Tower. I'm gonna want to come back and do more and more journeys. And I also have to say that the way that this book is narrated by, I think his name is Frank Mueller, brilliant. Oh my lord, brilliant. So well done. So well done. Just, I think that was really the cream on the crop. You know what I mean? It really added that extra flavor. and I just really genuinely enjoyed it. So I'm going to give it a straight 9 out of 10. I originally gave it like an 8.8, and the more I thought about it, the more I was like, no, this deserves a 9. This genuinely deserves a 9 out of 10. And then finally, after the drawing of the 3, I finished my month off, the month of February off, with Mr. Mercedes, which is the first book in the Bill Hodges trilogy by Stephen King. Guys, I did not intend to read this much Stephen King this year, all right? I knew that I was going to read more of him this year, but I thought I was going to be more balanced off. I thought between Dungeon Crawler Carl, Dandelion Dynasty, my eventual plans to start First Law, and finishing out the Austin Ard saga, or at least what's been written of it, would help me balance how much Stephen King I was going to read this year. But it turns out that I really enjoy reading his works, and I've been really digging everything I read so far. There hasn't been a miss for me yet. I did kind of try Carrie last year, and I didn't love it, so I guess that was a miss for me. But besides that, this has just been incredible. I mean, this is just one of those authors where I can just tell he's a favorite. I'm biased. He is a favorite. I understand why certain people don't like him. I don't blame them at all. He has certain quirks as an author I don't entirely enjoy. I think he has a weird relationship with just certain aspects of his story. But still, he's such a great writer that it doesn't even matter. And that I'm willing to totally let it fly. If he were a lesser author, I probably wouldn't finish his stories because of those elements. But here, I don't care. And Mr. Mercedes was a very good thriller. Again, I usually don't read thrillers, so I don't necessarily have like a high bar of entry. It's just not a genre I've read a lot of. I'd like to in the future, and I figured Mr. Mercedes with Stephen King would be a good entry point for me, just to see how much I enjoyed it. And this book was really good. I thought the pacing was great, which is not something I usually say for a Stephen King book. He likes to tell his yarn. You know what I mean? Like, he really likes to let a story just exist. It's super long. The Stand is super long. The Shining, it's not super long, but it's paced like slower and it builds. Salem's Lot's not a very long book, but it builds. And then there's the Dark Tower and the Mr. Mercedes book, where it's like, wow, okay, he can actually write a super fast-paced book when he wants to. So yeah, I think the main reason I liked Mr. Mercedes was the plot. I just felt like he was constantly giving us something to look at and something to constantly chew on. And there was just this sense of suspense and dread throughout this entire book that I felt. And Stephen King, I just want to quick say this. He has this ability to write villains. So I think Stephen King, this is going to be a hot take, maybe. But out of every author I've read, I think Stephen King has the best villains, period. I think that this dude knows how to write evil better than anyone else I've read. And maybe that's a hot take. Maybe you guys will push back, I've read a lot of great authors, Stephen Erickson, George R. R. Martin, Brandon Sanderson, etc. But Stephen King, there's just something about the way he writes villains that I just like. Maybe it's because it's so real. Even when it's supernatural, it's so disgusting and it's so human that I just hate them. But Stephen King has this ability to write hateable characters and villains so well, and that is no exception with Mr. Mercedes. I was disgusted while reading this book, like genuinely revolted. And if you can get me to have that kind of emotional reaction from a villain and what he's trying to do, you win. You win. I just thought that the plot of this was really great. I think the characters need some work. I'm hoping the rest of the trilogy really flushes these characters out. I'm hoping to care about them a little bit more. But I thought the pacing and the plot were so good that it didn't really matter if I wasn't as attached to characters as I'm used to in Stephen King books. But yeah, it was a good book overall. I'd give it another 8.3 out of 10. Wow, crazy. But yeah, I really enjoyed pretty much everything I read this month. The Stand is by far my favorite. It's my book of the month for February. Just an incredible tale. Stephen King knocked it out of the park with that one for me. I think that's my favorite book of his so far. And my least favorite would be The Veiled Throne. And part of that's expectations, part of that is coming off the stand, and part of that is just I didn't love the pacing in it. I think the first two Dandelion Dynasty books have really great pacing, despite being 1,000-page tomes, and The Veiled Throne does not. I kind of wanted it to be something different than it was, but it's also part of a greater story. There's the Speaking Bones is its part two, and it's kind of essential to read it to recontextualize the Veiled Throne. So maybe my opinion will change once I've finished the Speaking Bones. But overall, very good month. No bad books. No bad books. All good books at least. So going into March, I've got a few things planned. And the first of this, as I kind of mentioned earlier, is I'm going to try and switch between two series. It's what I like to do. So my plan is to try and read Last King of Austenard and The Dark Tower together. Obviously, there's way more Dark Tower books than our Last King of Austenard books. So I'm not sure what I'm going to do once I finish The Last King of Austenard books and then Dark Towers by itself. Maybe I'll just finish it out by its own. But we'll see. We'll see. But I'm currently about 10% into The Witchwood Crown. I think I'm 6 or 7 chapters in. And it's good. I mean, Tad Williams doesn't know how to write a bad book to save his life, I don't think. At least from everything I've read. And it's so good to be back in this world and be back with these characters who I fell in love with MST. I love the way he writes. I love his world. I love the way he writes characters. I love the way he writes dialogue. I think his prose is the best in the game that I've read. Just gonna be honest. I think it's better. I think it's better than everyone else. Maybe it's just because of how I kind of grew up on like fairy tales, and it's very fairy tale-esque, but with a dark twist. That's what it kind of feels like reading to me. But there's just something about Austenard and the way Williams has written it that really deeply resonates with me as a fantasy reader. It's fantasy the way it ought to be written. So far, I don't have a clear opinion on where I'm going to come down on the Witchwood Crown, but I would not be surprised if I gave this a high 8, low 9, or even a middling 9, because so far it's been a very, very good book. It's exactly what I expect from Tad Williams. I can already tell. I think I'm gonna like this more than The Heart of What Was Lost. I can probably tell I'm gonna like it more than The Stone of Farewell. So it's gonna be a very well scored book. After I finish The Witchwood Crown, which is gonna take me some time because it's like 39 hours on audio. It's a chunker of a book. It's like 700, 800 pages, something crazy like that. I'm gonna dive into The Wastelands, which is the third book in the Dark Tower. I'm excited for this one. I've said in my first and second review of this series, like, I love how weird it is, and everyone I've told about that, they say, oh, just wait until The Wastelands. It gets so much more weird. There's a talking train, it's a villain, and it talks and rhymes and schemes, and I'm excited. I don't know how Stephen King wrote Thomas the Tank Engine as a villain, but I'm interested to see what he does with that, because so far, I've always felt like, despite having very fantastical villains, they've always been fairly grounded. Even Pennywise, I felt like there was an element to him that made sense to my brain. Even though he's kind of like a eldritch horror. But a talking train, I'm gonna see if Stephen King can sell that to me. I think he can. I have no doubt. I feel like this is gonna just be one of those books where I'm gonna be blown away, and I wouldn't be surprised if this ends up being my favorite Dark Tower book so far. I hear it's better than The Drawing of the Three, which I already thought was incredible. So I'm really excited for that. After that, I'm going to jump into Empire of Grass. Another chunker. Another big book. I think it's another like 34 to 40 hours. So obviously I'm switching between much shorter books and much longer books. And I feel like that balance is really going to be key to enjoying both. But Empire of Grass, I don't even know what to speculate about what this book is going to be. I know that there's a Scythe on the cover of the really cool art. I'm going to try and put an image here, but I don't know. I'm excited to see what Tab Williams does. The hints at what's going on in the Witchwood Crown so far have me interested, and I always read the blurbs of every book I'm going to read just for the fun of it usually, and Empire of Grass sounds like it's going to be good. It sounds like it's going to be a very interesting story. After that, I'm going to jump into Wizard and Glass, which is apparently a side story that explores more of Roland's background and what exactly happened to him and to his kingdom that he was living in, and how the world moved on, as Stephen King writes it. And I'm really interested in this. I know some people think Wizard and Glass is the best. Some people don't love the side story aspect. But for me, I really want to know what's going on in this universe. I really want to know kind of generally what's going on. I have a lot of questions, and I think Stephen King is going to have a lot of answers in Wizard and Glass. So I'm interested to see how I'll feel, because like maybe I'll be so invested in the main story that I won't want to be sidetracked. But also maybe this will help flesh out the story and the world and the universe, which I think is pretty much always a good thing for an author to do. But yeah, I'm very interested. I really like the cover art. I think it's so cool. I think the cover art of every Dark Tower book is really cool. That's maybe a hot take, but I just think it's really fun to look at. And then finally, I'm going to read Brothers of the Wind, which is a prequel novel in the Austin Art series. I think it's 10 or 12 hours. And it follows Inaluki, who is the main villain in the Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn. And I don't know. I think I read the description, and I'm really intrigued to see what he does with it. I don't know how important it will be to the rest of The Last King of Austin Art, but I'm really excited to get more Scythy action. I find that the Hikadea and the Scythy are just really interesting characters. I wish more authors wrote more perspectives from the immortal races. I think that's a really fun idea to follow. I think Stephen Erickson does it really well in his Malazan series, and I'm interested to see how exactly Williams will handle Inaluki, because this is a dude who has been villain. I mean, he's a mega villain. He's the Dark One, you know what I mean? And I'm really interested, especially because apparently there's going to be a dragon fight, maybe. At least that's what the blurb says. So I'm kind of hyped. I'm kind of hyped for Brothers of the Wind. I hear it's excellent, so I'm really excited. And then finally, if I can squeeze it in, and this is just a perspective, this is a prospect of mine. If I can squeeze it in, and I don't think I will, because I'm reading some chunkers this month, and in between I'm reading Dark Tower. But if I can squeeze it in at the end of the month, I'm going to try and get around back to Speaking Bones, which is the fourth book in the Dandelion Dynasty. I don't like to let a series that I've not finished it too long. I try to always finish series within a reasonable amount of time. I'm pretty stubborn. I like to finish things. I'm a completionist by nature. That's why my video game catalog is insane. And I want to read the rest of the story, but right now I don't have a lot of interest. But I'm hoping to get, if I, spice up my reading with Dark Tower and Last King of Austin Art, and I get some distance away from the Veiled Throne, I'm hoping that I will be more interested in Speaking Bones, because I hear it's back on track with what I expect from this series. It's much higher quality than the Veiled Throne, and that's a great conclusion to the story. Plus, I love Ken Liu and the way he writes, and I feel like it'd be a disservice to not try and finish this book this month, if I can. Obviously, we'll see. Maybe I'll read way more books than the ones I've listed. Maybe I'll want to read something completely different. It's hard to tell. Obviously, I plan these things out. I do try to stick to them, but occasionally I'll just decide to go off the reservation. I went off the reservation and read The Dark Tower, started it, and fell in love with it, and now I want to read the rest of the series as quickly as humanly possible. I'm restraining myself, that way you guys don't get burnt out either. Just from me just reviewing one series. I do try to spice up for you guys too. I do it for my own entertainment, obviously, most of all, but I do try and throw out more books, and as you guys can probably tell, I'm trying to bridge into more series and more genres. It's what I kind of started doing with Mr. Mercedes. I've put a few thrillers on my TBR. Fantasy and science fiction is my bread and butter, obviously, as a reader. That's what I kind of really lean towards. But I think kind of once I start clearing more of my TBR, my immediate TBR, and I finish up Dark Tower, and I finish up Last Kings of Art, and I, finish up Dandelion Dynasty, and I think you'll see some more different genres of fiction. I think you'll see some stuff that's more maybe historical and maybe thriller. I can't guarantee it because there's a lot on my TBR, a lot I want to read, but I want to throw it out there that I if you guys have suggestions for books you want me to review eventually, I will do it. I will put it on my TBR. I can't guarantee it'll be this year. I can't even guarantee it'll be next year because I got a lot I want to read. I haven't even started finishing up First Law. I haven't even started thinking about the Rift War quartet, or is it a trilogy? I'm not really sure. And all that. I haven't even thought about finishing up DCC. There's a lot I have to read, a lot. But I'm excited because I think 2025 is going to be a big year for books for me.